Hi everyone and welcome to Storytime. Now today is the third in 3 true stories from the Bible about a man called Paul. Do you remember Paul? Liz was telling us a few weeks ago that Paul started off as Saul. Now Saul was a man who knew a lot about God, but he wasn't one of God's friends because he hated people who followed Jesus and he spent his time trying to put them in prison. Well, all that changed for Saul. One day, Jesus spoke to him, and Saul realised that Jesus is the king, and he became Paul. And he went around, instead of trying to put people in prison who followed Jesus, he went around talking to people all about Jesus. And lots of people followed Jesus when they heard what Paul said. But not everyone loved what Paul was doing. And Paul quite often found himself in prison. Well, after a while, when he'd been in and out of prison, the people who were in charge at the time decided that Paul was going to be sent far away to a place called Rome. And they decided that he needed to go and see the king at that time, who was called Caesar, who was in charge of everyone. And that the king, Caesar, would decide whether what Paul said was right or wrong. Now, to get to Rome, it was a very long way away. And he had to go on a boat. Now, the problem was that they set off as the weather was getting colder, and there was a Roman guard because Paul was a prisoner and lots of other prisoners on board. But there was a storm, a terrible storm, and the waves and the wind blew and blew. I don't know if you've been listening to the wind blowing this week. Well, this was much, much worse than the storm we've had this week. This was a terrible storm, and everyone on board the ship thought they were going to die. But an angel came to Paul one night and said, "Paul, you are going to go to Rome. You will get there safely and you are not going to drown." So Paul, when he'd woken up in the morning, he said to the other people on board the boat, "You're going to be okay. God has said that we're not going to drown, that the ship is going to be safe and you're all going to be rescued." Well, the storm kept going and it blew and blew and blew, but it happened just as Paul said. The ship, the boat, ran into a sandbank and everybody was able to get off the ship and swim to the shore, and not one person drowned. You see, nothing was going to get in the way of God's plan for Paul to go to Rome and talk to the king, to talk to Caesar about Jesus. Not a storm, not a shipwreck, nothing would stop God's plan. And as Paul got to Rome and talked to people about Jesus, the good news about Jesus spread further and further, and it reached really far away places, even places like London where we live, and people like us. In fact, it's the same good news that we hear today, that Jesus died, that he rose again, that we can be forgiven our sins and be friends with God forever. Now, over the last few weeks, we've been learning a song that's all about that, that's called Jesus is the King. And we're going to sing that again in a moment. So if you'd like to join in, come and join in and sing with us as we sing Jesus is the King.